Hey guys, Jesse here, and in this tutorial we'll be learning how to get this sort of effect on your Gunpla. This is a paint chipping effect, and as an added bonus we'll also be learning how to get these sort of black streaks coming off the edges. Now there are many ways to get this effect. There's the salt weathering method and the hairspray method, but in this tutorial we'll be using the easiest method, and that's using a sponge. And the advantage of that is your kit doesn't need to be painted. This is an unpainted kit, so this is really a tutorial for beginners or those looking for the quickest and easiest way to get this sort of paint chipped effect. Now we'll just start off with what you'll need, and what you'll need are some paints. You'll need a silver for the darker parts. This is a tester's flat aluminum. For the lighter parts you'll need a brown. This is tester's flat rust. Also for the lighter parts, we're going to need black. This is just Walmart Folk Art black. It really can be any black. In fact, any of these can be from any brand. We just want good colors. For the brown, I would suggest a darker brown over a lighter brown. Then, of course, you'll need sponges. I'm using just some pieces I cut off of this larger sponge. This is a very fine sponge, as you can see. You can find sponges like these from Michael's or Hobby Lobby. In fact, this came from a variety pack that only cost me about $2, and it came with a variety of coarse and soft sponges, and you can use those to sort of experiment on spare pieces about what kind of effect you'd like to give with the chipping. For me, the finer sponges allow you to get into the little nooks and crannies very easily. I'm also using this sponge. This is just same sort of fine sponge, just on a nice little handle that I found at Michael's as well. For the streaking, we're going to be using Tamiya Weathering Master. Set B, we'll be using the suit, or set, as some people like to say. And at the end, you'll want to grab your favorite top coat to seal it all off. This is Tamiya TS80. Love this stuff. Okay, so let's just get started. We're going to be weathering a Master Grade Strike Gundam from 2003. And before we start, I just want to emphasize two things about when sponging and paint chipping a kit, and really weathering in general. You want to keep in mind two things: scale and consistency. Weathering a 1:100 scale is a lot different from weathering a 1:144 scale. You got to make sure all the chips and the scratches match the scale. Personally, I like to use the little pilot figures that come with the kit to sort of put it up against how the weathering looks, if it looks realistic, if it looks like these scratches and stuff makes sense, as you can see. Because if it's too big, it may look strange, and if it's too small, it may not look realistic enough. And the second thing is consistency. You want to make sure that as you're sponging around your piece or around your kit, that it matches with the rest of your kit. If you've accidentally went too heavy on your first part of your kit and you've already top coated and it's done, tough luck. You're going to have to go heavy on the rest of the kit. A consistent kit looks far better than an inconsistent kit, even if the base technique is poorly implemented or incorrectly implemented. That being said, you also don't want to really switch techniques halfway through the build. So if you're watching this tutorial and you've gotten to the legs and you just now want to start doing sponging, I would suggest maybe waiting for the next kit to do it, because it won't match the rest of your kit and it'll look strange. So keeping scale and consistency in mind, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by weathering or sponging the darker pieces on this. Now you see there aren't a lot of large dark pieces on here. We're just going to do the gray here, but they do have edges, so we're going to go ahead and sponge those up. After shaking your bottle here and getting some paint on the cap, you want to take your sponge and go ahead and get some paint on it. Now I'm lazy, so I like to just use the inside of the cap here to get my paint, so you can see. I'd probably suggest pouring it out, but I don't really like to waste paint. And on a paper towel, which I forgot to mention earlier that you'll need, Just go ahead and dab, as you can see, until the paint is nearly dry and you get a nice pattern that you like. After that, go ahead and take your sponge and your piece and lightly, and I mean lightly, dab on to the edges. We want to focus on edges and corners. When we get to the lighter parts, I'll show you how to do larger surfaces, like flat surfaces, because this is very useful also for large flat surfaces. But as you can see, we're just going to work our way around here, just sort of randomly choosing where we decide to dab. Camera's having some problems focusing, but for me, that's probably enough. Now it's looking a little thick, so sometimes I'll take my finger and sort of dab on there. I shouldn't have wiped there, but I can fix that. Just sort of dab my finger on there and absorb some of the paint. You can probably use a different part of your sponge to do that too, but I find that skin is a little more absorbent. Probably bad for my skin, but that's just what I do. Go ahead and hit up these other parts. Now, if you feel like your sponge is getting kind of sticky, or you're just not seeing it transfer to the piece anymore, you can go ahead and get some more paint on there, but be sure to dab back onto the paper towel before you continue. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to the rest of this piece, and we'll move on from there. Now, just for demonstration's sake, I have a foot here, so I'm just gonna repeat the technique here. Again, have my sponge with the silver paint on it, nearly dry, attacking the corners and the edges of the model. Silver works best on dark pieces like red, dark blue, black, and gray. You'll really want to save silver for those pieces. It doesn't work very well on lighter pieces like white and such like that. Just getting a little more paint. This is just a larger surface, so I want to demonstrate on this as well. It always looks best on corners, if you ask me. And I would consider that done. So in combination with the dry brushing and the silver sponging, it looks pretty convincing on these darker surfaces. So now we'll move on to the lighter pieces. So for the lighter parts, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to need brown and black. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, you can use gray as an intermediate between the two. I think it would be a little much on a 1 to 100 scale model, so I would actually save it for something larger like a 1/60th model or a mega size. So let's just get started here. Again, we're going to open up. We're going to start with brown first. And the idea behind this is to sort of give a rusted effect or a sort of dirt effect. Now this one was kind of full, so I'm just going to dab on the edge here. The bottle, again, I'm pretty lazy, so you really should be pouring this out and having its own little dedicated pot. But same thing as we did earlier, dabbing onto a paper towel to sort of get it almost dry. Taking our model here and slowly dabbing down the edges. Now again, you want to do this very, very lightly. If you push too hard, you will end up smearing the paint that you put onto the model. And we don't want smears. So, and same idea as the darker parts, going at the edges and corners. And that looks pretty good for just for that piece. I'd say that's enough for the knee. And just gonna do some other parts of the model. I'm not gonna do the whole thing in this one take. I'll finish it up and come back to it. As you can see, I'm starting to run out a bit of paint on my sponge, so I'm just gonna get some more. Be sure to always dab off your excess or you will just flood the piece with paint, and we don't want that. Pushing a little harder there to get into the nooks and crannies. But remember, as you're doing this, think story. Think about what you're trying to achieve with this effect. Does this suit make sense to have rust on it? Does it make sense to have paint chips in the places that you're putting the paint chips? What would cause those paint chips? Asteroids, other mobile suits. You know, if this is a land ground based suit, perhaps branches and trees and rocks caused it, so maybe add some grass stains and such with some green paint. Now, again, I'm going at the corners here, but some places, especially on this older master grade, have large open areas, such as this thigh, or better, on the calf here. For that, you can just go straight onto the surface, sort of randomly, touching in places there. So while this works best on corners and edges and stuff, you can do large surfaces like this, which gives a pretty nice effect. Personally, if I were to spend a large amount of time weathering a model, I'd probably use a very fine tip brush and make little dots and streaks on here rather than using a sponge. But here we're doing it the beginner, lazy way, which there's nothing wrong with. Here I'm doing it on the decal just to show that you shouldn't be afraid to weather your decals, for one, but how it looks on a decal. So let's get that on there. So you see here I pushed a little too hard, so I sort of smudged it a little bit. But to fix that, just grab a brush and some thinner, or a paper towel and some thinner, get a little moist, and just wipe it off. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this piece, and we'll come back and do the black. Now that my brown is done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the black. But before I do, I'm going to check my consistency here with the other leg, which I also weathered up. Now, I'm just checking to see if the scale of the marks match, the areas that I weathered in all match, and that the consistency is good, that it looks like it belongs to the same model. Now, when I say consistency, I don't necessarily mean the quantity of weathering. You can always have one part that's more weathered than the other. It all depends on the story you're trying to tell. But you just want to make sure that they look like they belong in the same model. And I have to say, these two look pretty good together. So we can go ahead and move on to doing the black. So I've got it on an alligator clip here just so I can avoid touching the model too much because my hands are a little dirty now. But I'm going to be using this sponge, and as you can see, the sponge is a little, it's just a little dirty. It's not as dirty as my other sponges, but the reason for that is because I cleaned this brush, and that's because I use a black acrylic, which just thins with water. So all I have to simply do is, after using this with an acrylic black, is to clean it off in my little pot here and rinse it under some warm water, and it'll get most of the paint out. These other paints I was using were enamels, so they clean with mineral spirits or lighter fluid or paint thinner. But since these sponges are a little disposable, I just cut off pieces. I don't bother to clean these. I just kind of use them as I go. But that might be interesting to you to clean them instead. So just like before, I'm going to be using the paint out of the cap here. Now black, as you'll see here in a second, takes a lot more sponging onto the paper towel before you get somewhat dry. It is acrylic, so it's a little more thin. But that looks pretty good. And I'm just going to take this and again, gently sponge right on top of the brown in the exact same areas. Now, the effect of this is that we're going to have a nice double layer of brown and black. The black is sort of paint chipping off, and the brown is sort of the underlying metal rusting. Now, some people might argue, in the Gundam universe, perhaps Gundam shouldn't really rust that much, depending on what they're made of. But we're going for realism and looks here, not accuracy. Again, just attacking the corners. We're going to get something of this effect. Nice, good double layer of color. We're going to just do this throughout the model. Again, you can do it on these large surfaces. I'm going to have to actually grab the model because I can't get it in frame. Something of that effect. So my phone actually ran out of memory before I could complete a final thought on the black sponging part, but what I want to say is you got to make sure that your pattern on your sponge is something kind of like this, where you have nice large blotches with tiny little specks, because if it's all small specks like here sort of and here, then it'll look really strange on the model. I've done it before, and like a multiple of tiny specks does look quite odd. So you want a good mix of large specks and small specks when trying to get a good pattern on your sponge. But that's it for sponging. As you can see, the black here on this piece is complete. And right now, this looks pretty good. This looks like a convincing chipped paint effect, but just to give it some definition, take it a bit further, we're going to do some streaking. So again, Tamiya Weathering Master B, we're going to be using the soot. And what you get in these is this little applicator, has sort of like a makeup applicator here and a brush. Now, I've had this set for as far as I can remember, so that tells you these things last. But my applicator is worn out, so I went out to Walmart and bought some new applicators. You can find these in the makeup section for under $1, but we will still need the brush here, so that's why I've held on to that. So you're just going to get your soot here. When you buy this brand new, these powders will be completely solid, so you'll want to take an X-Acto knife or something and kind of break it up. But mine has been used for years, so mine's already broken up. So you're going to get good amount onto your applicator here. And what I like to do is I like to look for vents and openings. So we've got a nice exhaust vent here, and you're going to take the tip of your applicator and just pull straight down. Now, I've gone over a sticker here, so it's going to look a little strange, but that's what we're going to want to do. And what I like to do is just kind of pick random edges and corners and just sort of give them a bit of definition, focusing mainly on the top parts of the model where dust and dirt and stuff would accumulate from use. It's going to be a little hard to see, but we're just dirtying up those parts. And for the streaking, I like to start from anything that I feel like water or dirt or something would flow down. So the sides of these ankle armors are prime candidates. As you can see, I'm just using the tip of my applicator to pull straight down. And you can go over it multiple times. You'll want to do random lengths. But this, in combination with the paint chipping effect, makes a really nice, convincing look that the mobile suit is being used. It's been out there in the field for a while. But of course, it's all dependent on your story. One more time, I got to emphasize that. Really use your imagination in terms of what kind of look you want to get. But this is it. That's what I do for streaking. Again, on the top surfaces, like on top of these ankle armors, I'll just go ahead and go over it with the black soot to kind of make it a bit darker on top. But as you can see, my hand's like covered in this powder, and so is the model right now. So what we'll do is we're going to take our brush here and just lightly brush it up, and that'll get off any kind of residual dust on there. And yeah, I do that on a majority of the model, just going over on edges and such, getting into the nooks and crannies, pulling down from little cracks like here, emphasizing that I'm using the tip of my applicator to do this sort of streaking effect. Because if you use the side, it'll be too broad. You really want to be able to get these nice thin streaks. And when you use the tip here, you kind of have control over that. So yeah, that's really about it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and top coat it. So after you're done applicating everything, you've finished all your pieces, you're done streaking, throw some top coat on there. You'll need it to hold the paint and the soot. And then when I'm back with that, I'll show you the finished product. And after one top coat later, this is our finished product. I ended up adding the foot just because it was done. But as you can see, if you apply all the techniques and did streaking in appropriate places, this is what it'll look like after you throw a top coat on there, which I think really brings it all together. That matte top coat really ties together the look for a weathered kit. So I hope this was useful to y'all. Please leave comments for any suggestions for future tutorials, and please ask any questions you may still have. I'll be more than happy to answer them. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.